Hello. Today we're going to talk about Eastern and Western perspectives on positive psychology. For me, this is a very fascinating topic to look at how both Western and Eastern traditions influence the way we view happiness and living a good life. You'll probably come to appreciate, as you consider these Eastern and Western views, just how much psychology in general and positive psychology more specifically have been influenced by a Western perspective. But increasingly, within the field of positive psychology and other areas of psychology, researchers and scholars are coming to appreciate more fully how an Eastern perspective can really add a whole new and rich dimension to our understanding of human nature, and how both of these perspectives together, what authors of a book call the psychology of us, putting the I or individual perspective and the we perspective together, can be beneficial. So let's talk about the Western perspective a little bit. In thinking about positive psychology concepts that relate directly to the Western perspective, we would think about words like hope, optimism, self-efficacy, which means having confidence in our ability to achieve things. The Western perspective takes a more linear view of happiness, where we have some goal that we are trying to achieve in life, and we work towards that goal. Achieving that goal is thought to bring us greater happiness. The Eastern view, however, takes a more circular rather than linear view of happiness, appreciating how happiness is more a matter of having balance in our lives, and how happiness involves a realization that we are going to go through some hard times, but they are temporary, and eventually we'll get to a better place again. So these are some initial thoughts on the difference between an Eastern and Western view, and we will explore these differences further during our discussion today. So let's talk about Western influences further, especially the influence of the early philosophers of Greece and the Judeo-Christian religious tradition, both of which have influenced the way we think about human nature. To think about the early Athenian view, now we're talking about 350, 500 BC, around in there, it would bring us to a consideration of Aristotle. In your supplemental reading list, in your syllabus, I have provided you with access to a free electronic version of Aristotle's famous work, Nicomachean Ethics, in which he talks about happiness and virtue. So for Aristotle, virtuous living was something important that we hopefully all aspire toward. And Aristotle believed that the pathway to joy is by our ability to live out our virtues in our everyday lives. and that the more we practice our virtues, the greater our level of joy. Well, one of the things you're going to be doing this summer term or semester, depending upon when you're taking this course, is you're going to be practicing your own virtues every week. And you're going to be gaining some understanding of those virtues by completing the Values in Action survey that will allow you to look at strengths associated with 6 virtues. Now, Aristotle would say that's a good thing, that you're becoming more aware of your virtues and working on practicing them, because he believed that that is what leads to joyful living. He also believed that the community has an important responsibility in helping us to have the encouragement, support to engage in a virtuous life. So when we think about the Judeo-Christian tradition, just consider for a moment the Bible, both the Old Testament and the New Testament, and the attention that is given to various virtues in that important work. For example, in the Old Testament, the virtues of faith, hope, and charity are highlighted. And later they were discussed as a part of the 7 heavenly virtues by Thomas Aquinas, who also lists the virtues of fortitude, justice, temperance, and wisdom, which he called the cardinal virtues, along with the virtues of faith, hope, and charity. In your readings, you will have the opportunity to explore both Western and Eastern philosophical and religious traditions as they relate to our understanding of human nature and virtues more specifically. And I think you will see some important parallels between these 2 ways of thinking about what makes us humans the way we are. So, in summary, when we think about what distinguishes the Eastern perspective of optimal human functioning from that of the Western perspective, we could say that the expectation of and desire for balance distinguishes Easterners' views of optimal human functioning from the linear path taken by Westerners in their pursuit of happiness and in their efforts to resolve problems and monitor progress. In considering Eastern and Western cultural perspectives, it can help us to look at the difference between an individualistic perspective, which characterizes Western culture, and a collectivist viewpoint, which is associated with most Eastern cultures. When we look at these 2 different perspectives, it helps us to appreciate that positive psychology, which focuses a lot on studying strengths, needs to consider how what would be considered a strength in Western culture, that is in an individualistic culture, might be different than what would be considered a strength in a collectivist culture. So let's take a look at the differences between individualistic and collectivist cultures first, and then I hope that you'll give some thought to examples of strengths that might be viewed as strengths in individualistic culture and how they might be different from what would be viewed as strengths in a collectivist culture. So, as you're probably already aware, individualistic cultures focus more on individual pursuits, while collectivist cultures focus more on what is good for the group. While traits such as independence, assertiveness, and ambition might be viewed as strengths in an individualistic culture, in a collectivist culture, other traits such as sharing, agreeableness, and devotion to others might be viewed more as strengths. In Western individualistic cultures, the main focus is on the individual, who is held above the group in importance. Personal accomplishment and achievement are emphasized, whereas in collectivist Eastern cultures, the group is valued above the individual. Cooperation is accentuated. And these different emphases in what is valued determine which constructs are considered strengths in each type of culture. One saying in Eastern collectivist culture that I really like, that helps us to think about differences between East and West, is the saying, a good fortune may forebode a bad luck, which may in turn disguise a good fortune. What do you suppose is meant by that statement? For me, the statement helps us to appreciate the circular rather than linear nature of happiness and the importance of a balance in our lives. You could probably think of examples in your own life and the lives of others of going through difficult times. And one of the things that is very helpful to consider when going through difficult times is that they are always temporary. Eventually things change. Maybe not exactly in the way we thought they would change, but eventually they change. So when we can think of our lives in more in this way, in this circular way, and more in a way that helps us to work towards achieving balance, it can help us considerably in being able to weather the storms of life and be even more grateful for the good times we are able to enjoy. This ancient Chinese proverb, to know the road ahead, ask those coming back, also helps us to appreciate differences between East and West in terms of their orientation to time. In Western cultures, the individual often looks to the future. Strengths that are highly valued reflect future-oriented thinking, like the strengths of hope, optimism, and self-efficacy, which we mentioned earlier. But in Eastern cultures, there's a greater focus on and respect for the past. There's value in the past. Looking backward is respected. And as a result, elders are highly regarded for their wisdom in Eastern culture. Think about this for a moment. In the United States, the suicide rate per 100,000 people is around 12 people. Per 100,000. Of the different groups within the United States, Native Americans have the absolute highest suicide rate overall. But among elderly Americans, elderly Native Americans have the lowest suicide rate of all elderly groups. Why do you suppose that would be so? Well, Native American culture tends to be more collectivist. And the elderly in Native American culture are held in high regard. Families really revere them and look up to them for their wisdom and take good care of them. And the elderly feel a sense of purpose in their communities as a result. Another way we might contrast East and West would be to say that Western culture, as we've already said, is more individualistic. It focuses more on independence and competition, whereas Eastern culture is more collectivistic, focusing more on interdependence and cooperation. We could also say that when we think about how Eastern and Westerners tend to think about life and happiness and what's important in life, that Westerners, as we've already stated, tend to have a more linear way of thinking, of working towards achieving some goal. And their happiness is built on the notion of hope, which is a more future-oriented construct. Whereas the Eastern view focuses more on the pursuit of balance, thinking of our experience as being more cyclical and built on the strength of endurance. The Eastern symbol of yin yang helps us to understand this Eastern notion of balance. Here we see the symbol for yin and yang. This is a Taoist figure, spelled Taoist. The T is pronounced like a D. And it represents the circular, constantly changing nature of the world as viewed by Eastern thought. The dark part is thought to be feminine and passive, while the light part is thought to be masculine and active. And you can see that each part exists because of the other. Neither could exist alone. As one state is experienced, the other is not far to follow. If hard times are occurring, easier times are on the way. But the Westerner, as we've already said, takes a more linear approach to happiness, drawing a straight line to his goal, looking for possible obstacles and finding a way around it. His goal is to achieve eternal happiness, and he uses the strength of hope to achieve this. But the Easterner follows the yin and yang. For the Easterner, the Westerner's goal of happiness may not make sense. If one were to seek happiness and achieve it, for the Easterner, unhappiness would be close on its heels. The Easterner might have a goal of balance, using the strength of endurance. Great unhappiness and suffering would be equally balanced by great happiness. I would like to tell you a story about a teenage girl I once knew that for me nicely demonstrates this concept of yin and yang. When I was a practicing psychologist, I once had referred to me by a psychiatrist in the community where I worked, a 16-year-old female who had attempted suicide and was recently discharged from a psychiatric hospital. I was asked to see her as a part of her aftercare plan, and I was honored to do so. So after we had been working together for a couple of months, she came in to me one day and she said, "I'm so happy that I did not succeed at killing myself because my life is going so much better now." And the next thing that she said to me, I thought reflected great wisdom for a teenager. She said, "In the future, when I go through difficult times, I hope I can remember that they are always temporary." And this, for me, is the essence of the Easterner's way of looking at things. And happiness and suffering are equally balanced by great happiness. In clinical situations, when people are going through crises, or if they have made a suicide attempt, helping them to eventually appreciate the temporary nature of their struggles and that eventually things will change. Like we said earlier, maybe not in exactly the way the person thought they were going to change, but eventually they change. It can be a very important part of the treatment process and an important lesson to learn in living for us all.